are honored to have with us Dr. Aymar Jean Escoffery, who goes by AJ, who is the Margaret Walker Professor of Communication Studies here at Northwestern University, and the 2024-25 Visiting Scholar at Harvard University's Berkman Klein Center. Dr. Escoffery co-founded OTV here in the house, Open Television, which is a platform for intersectional television. OTV programs have received recognition from the Television Academy, the Emmy Awards, the Webby Awards, Streamy Awards, Gotham Awards, among others. Dr. Aymar, AJ, regularly serves as executive producer of films and series, including Jules Roscombe's Desire Lines, which won a special jury award at the 2024 Sundance Film Festival. His work has been recognized by the MacArthur Foundation and Field Foundation, Variety, Filmmaker Magazine, New City, Chicago Magazine, and Seed and Spark as a filmmaker to watch in 2018. AJ will share a talk on his rich experiences, which is part of a book that you all received, which he generously donated and gifted to all of our members, which is called Reparative Media, Lessons from the Cookout. After his talk, there will be time for a short Q&A, so please jot some ideas or questions down for him, and let's get to it. Dr. Escoffery, AJ, Aymar, welcome.
I had to put on a little look for y'all. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me today. Thank you so much to Michelle, who was so critical for just getting me oriented, and Sonia and Sahar for having me. I just so respect what you do, the effort and the love and care that you put into this community, and it's truly an honor here to be sharing some lessons with you today. I did consent to this being posted publicly later, so you can take photo and video as you see fit. I see that you have rules about posting later, very smart, but you're welcome to take it throughout the talk. And yeah, I think we can get into it. So today I want to start with just a little bit of a brief slide as to how I'm understanding harm in our media ecosystem, because I'll be talking a lot about how do we repair that and heal that today. I'll only do like one slide though, because I think y'all know, but I want you to see how I'm framing everything. Then I will introduce this concept of reparative media. Most of the talk will be this cookout process that I used to frame my book, and was really how I understood a lot of the early work that I put into OTV, which you'll hear a lot about. I should say that this is about like the early years of OTV, because as you all know, Elijah McKinnon runs OTV now, and things are much different and in some ways a lot better. So I'm going to be sharing a lot of vulnerable things today about like things that I messed up on, right? I just wanted to be vulnerable with y'all because you are leaders, and I know this work is hard, and it's really hard to do perfectly. It's kind of impossible to do perfectly. So I thought that you might appreciate that. So that is specific to this audience, but as vulnerable as it gets, it's going to be public. It's all in the book. And then I'll end on this concept of ancestral intelligences, which I see ancestral wisdom is in your mission statement. So I think you also will really get it. So to start, I want to start by asking, at a time in human history when we are more connected than ever, why does it feel like our cultural divisions, our collective wounds are intensifying? And I would say that the systems connecting our cultures in the United States, media, technology, and information systems, are perpetuating harms. In subtle but profound ways, they limit our worldview, our understanding of ourselves, our communities, and our planet. Here, I'm using an allegory of culture as an ecosystem whose lands are largely owned by for-profit driven institutions. I think about fast food versus slow, locally sourced agriculture produced in biodiverse environments as a productive allegory to critique corporate media and tech's impact on our cultural ecosystem. We know that distributing fast food benefits from unethical, unsustainable production. We eat plastic in our food, produced on farms that harm the soil and animals, served to us by underpaid workers who lack collective bargaining rights. Similarly, media and tech companies distribute most of the stories we consume and who decide who gets to produce them, privileging what is fast, globally consumable, and profitable over what is slow, locally diverse, and sustainable. U.S. media and tech systems prioritize developing stories and platforms to target distinct audiences for profit, but our communities need to cultivate interdependence and solidarity to repair the historical injustices that shape our cultural and physical environment. Healing these injustices, including racism, misogyny, xenophobia, transphobia, homophobia, classism, ableism, and other forms of hate, requires a specific method of repair, redistributing power more equitably to the historically disempowered. I'm here to argue that people like you are cultural healers in this environment, your stories essential technologies for cultural development, and grassroots distribution a key and underutilized method for systemic healing. And I think this video is not online anymore, but it's cool to check out. It's old, but I love how it just frames media industries as like in this competing natural environment that is actually wholly unnatural, right? We know there's nothing natural about how media is circulating today. So what does it mean to experiment with healing the extractive, divisive dynamics of media and tech industries and cultivate a more equitable and sustainable cultural ecosystem? That's the question I want to address today. Reparative media is based on, there we go, 5 years of deep, productive, and complex work co-creating an independent alternative to networked media platforms like Netflix, a Chicago-based channel called OTV Open Television, developed in solidarity with Black and brown, queer, trans, and women-identified artists, or as I like to call them, professional cultural healers. From 2015 to around 2019-2020, when I led the project, we released around 70 narrative pilots, series, and short films, some documentary and video artworks. Most of them were short-form narrative series, to an audience of several thousand people in Chicago and many times more online. OTV is now run by my co-founder Elijah McKinnon, and we celebrate 10 years in 2 weeks at the MCA at an all-day meeting that Elijah has put on that is going to be amazing if you can make it. I think it's sold out, but there's a wait list. We'll work on getting you in there. Okay, so if I were to distill how and why OTV works, it would be this. Centering the most harmed by systems at the local level promotes accountability for everyone and challenges capitalist modes of production and distribution. In this talk, I offer an exclusive candid look at what it takes to make reparative media and to enact this very reductive formula in an embodied way. Because as you know more than most, organizing is beautiful and very messy. So I'm going to spill some tea as a way to show you how I'm learning to do this work. And I know that you all have to come to some kind of collective agreement as to what to do with this kind of pot of money. And so I would encourage you to think about this formula as you figure out what are the values that you need to bring into that process, what are the things you need to prioritize, because for me this is a kind of way of thinking about sustainable and accountable infrastructure development for our culture in ways that hopefully can minimize harm. Much of what I'll say today are in 2 books, actually. In these books, I theorize community-based distribution through the lens of the cookout, a form of Black American ancestral intelligence where hosts cultivate platforms to invite communities to collectively cook or produce and serve or distribute something nourishing. Hosts then cultivate knowledge on the process to ensure they do it better next time and that value can be equitably distributed. I focus on distribution because it connects the development and production of stories to audiences or communities through platforms. The cookout uses an ancestral practice of gathering as an allegory for decentralizing power and ownership in the process of creating and exhibiting culture. To explore the practices supportive of cultivating community-based ways of knowing, I then published an Afro-Indigenous futurist comic version of my academic book called The Cookout, A Guide to AI Ancestral Intelligence. The comic extends the reparative media book to critique corporate AI and is also a handbook that organizers like you can use to see their projects and collaborations through this lens, including insights and actual organization documents from the early years of OTV. This is an exclusive gift to you as a community, and you'll note that you've received a free copy. If you haven't, please talk to Michelle and she'll get you one. I hope that it serves your work in some way, and if not, I encourage you to gift it to an artist or cultural organizer who is aligned with Cookout values. And the download links are in that slide, and they'll be in the last slide as well for this, because it's a PDF. You can share it and download it. It's for everyone who has Cookout values. So we start with the invitation, which is the critical question for the Cookout, right? This is what people ask. Who's invited? And it is how we commit to centering the most structurally harmed. We love to talk about who's invited to the Cookout first because it establishes whether any space is going to be safe and nourishing for people for whom spaces like this are increasingly rare. At OTV, what we saw first was that storytellers needed to invite their community to fundraise for and make their project, which meant that stories were community accountable before they were even finished. Practically, to supplement at the time the $500 to $2,000 that OTV paid to non-exclusively license their series, most creators needed to crowdfund for their work, as seen here in our partnership with Seed and Spark, the leading platform for indie TV fundraising, though some teams also secured state and nonprofit grants that the team and I assisted them in finding and prepping for. Primarily through crowdfunding from their communities, artists raised over $500,000 to Greenlight Productions from 2015 to 2020. Anyone can offer a resource, however, and liberation requires that we be as open as possible to those who may support our goals. If I invite you to support the creation of a healing story, what I'm cooking, and you offer support, you're developing reparative media with me. If your actions subsequently do not align with my values, I can rescind the invitation. But it is important for us to ask, what would it take for me to invite you back? This is challenging because some things are unforgivable and some things just trigger our fears, vulnerability, shame, or past violences. So let me give you all some tea about how OTV struggled to invite values-aligned funders to support us as a platform. I remember in 2019, an exchange with a large nonprofit foundation in its 5th year of supporting a media grant in Chicago. Over those years, OTV creators were applying to a local nonprofit that, let's say, whose leadership did not reflect our community, that administered the grant and were winning consistently, supported in part by my coaching. Nearly every year since 2016, OTV's most popular show was funded by this grant, even though that nonprofit was not offering artists any support for their projects beyond funding. In fact, artists consistently complained to me that the grant's administration made it harder for them to complete their projects. For a 5-year assessment of the program, the foundation funding the nonprofit asked for data on how the projects were doing, and I started receiving emails from artists asking for viewership counts. I got mad because quantitative viewership data is not the most important metric for community media. Instead, my grad students and I wrote a 30-page report offering those quantitative viewership metrics that were hidden from the public at the time because I wanted people to focus on the stories and not the views. But we also added qualitative assessments of success, including press, festival exhibitions, and testimonials from creators from interviews I was doing with them about how the project shaped their career opportunities. I emailed the foundation directly, knowing that the regranting institution would only report the numbers, and I was right. The foundation seemed surprised that a Black-led organization in Chicago was doing all of this research and artist support, and so they asked for a meeting. I told them that they should be funding OTV because we were fulfilling the fund's goals of promoting social justice and offering artists better support than the nonprofit that they were funding. The foundation told me that they were not able to do that for unspecified reasons. Meanwhile, that other nonprofit that didn't represent our community received hundreds of thousands of dollars in more funding, and then they updated their website with all of the other data that I collected on the programs they funded, data I only had because I had such close relationships with the artists with whom they did not. They took our research and the funding we deserve. I didn't call out each organization, and as you can see, I've anonymized them today. The main funder has been re-strategizing, and we continue to make entreaties to them to do the right thing. Staffs change, right? Organizations change. Resourcing liberation requires openness and flexibility to be invited to cultivate reparative media with us, whether you are in community or outside of it, trying, somewhat, to support us. Conversations around who's invited to the cookout often start with what we expect them to bring. What people bring is based both on skill, right? Do you use the right amount of salt? Are you using the right camera, right? And culture, right? Are there raisins in your potato salad? Do you have a connection to the community, right? You're free to bring what you want, but if you are not serving the needs of the culture, you may not be invited back or asked to bring some ice. Most of the media we consume is not made for healing, but for profit, based on recipes or, let's be honest, formulas designed for the masses rather than for specific cultures. How has this shaped our culture, the story we tell ourselves about ourselves? And I think we can see the kind of alternative culture we could have through your work and through the work that we cultivated at OTV. So once in production, once the artists started cooking, it mattered that creators had control over hiring. So who is behind the camera represented who was in front of the camera, which is very challenging in Hollywood due to unions and historically exclusive social networks. Sam Bailey, pictured there behind the boom operator, co-creator of the Emmy-nominated Brown Girls, recounted the experience of having a queer cinematographer when directing the coming out scene because she herself is not queer identified. She knew she had the right take for the coming out scene when the queer people behind the camera were crying. Right? These are the kinds of ingredients that go into our stories. And I've seen audiences react to that scene, and it works every single time. But I want to be honest here, as many of you know, that conflict is common in the process of cooking, in the process of production. The kitchen is a messy space, right? The biggest problems I see in collaboration fell along cultural lines. It was heartbreaking to see, but so many collaborations I saw between people of color and white people, usually between co-creators, but including between creators and directors and DPs, or between creators and producers, did not last. I wish this was not true, but there's too much evidence to avoid it. I noticed it at least a dozen times over my 4 years running OTV. Conflicts can fall along other lines as well: cisgender versus transgender, queer versus straight. Differences in class, nationality, and disability, and even religion can amplify conflicts. And it's not always clear who's wrong. Often the question is about power and control, though sometimes the issues are complex and interpersonal. Different levels of experience amongst people of color and white people can bring out triggers, right? Often white or other class privileged people are more experienced in film as a result of broader inequalities that might give them more opportunities in the corporate sphere. This can make people of color feel talked down to. These feelings of inadequacy can intensify during the high-pressure environment of production where time is money and every second wasted brings changes and compromises to the story. The feeling of marginalization can be particularly acute when it is the person of color's own story that they have written to heal. If production is running behind, as is common, the story becomes compromised, scenes cut, acting compromised, design flaws accepted. This can feel harmful, even if unintentional. OTV has a resource that we, and specifically Elijah and the firm MMG, published to help filmmakers mitigate these harms, and I think there's a download link right there to that report. But it is also clear that people of color need to own their power in production as a necessary precondition for healing the harm endemic to the process. I've seen creators of color get sidelined by white creators. I've seen black and brown people have white people write their stories only to be dissatisfied with the authenticity of the project. I've seen racialized people of color sign contracts that give executive producers complete control over the project, when writers of color who originated the story should be able to decide who the show sells to and who gets to profit. I've seen people of color partner with production companies that offer no support services, leaving all the fundraising and pre-production work to the POC creator while the company takes credit for doing much less work. Storytelling reclaims one's authority and history from a world that might devalue its power and value and ancestral intelligence. It can be incredibly healing if this power and value is asserted and respected throughout the process. How do we serve our nourishment? I see the cookout as a platform for serving culture, from food to art, right? Platforms serve communities. They distribute culture. Media is supposed to bring us together, but increasingly our media is either private or divisive. Everyone has their own screen or microphone. If we want strong social bonds, we need intentionally produced media events and platforms that promote a loving and pluralistic culture. Our corporate media tries to do this, but so often these events draw crowds for competition, right? I'm sure y'all have thoughts on reality television over a documentary, or the events are so watered down as to be for everybody, which is to say nobody in particular. So how is your project serving as a platform for specific communities to come together to create and share culture? What protocols or structure you're offering? The cookout doesn't happen without a host who is either an individual or an institution. Like many of you, hosts create platforms for community engagement. Reparative platforms are flexible containers designed to facilitate meaningful connection and real accountability. Corporate platforms sort and segregate our engagement and promote internal and external policies to limit the liability from the consequences. At the cookout, I can talk to people who can help mediate and restore justice, bringing together survivors and tending to their needs and boundaries. There are people in our communities who are great listeners and communicators, who are loved and beloved or respected by most, if not all, and who have shown their values through consistent action over time. At OTV, in the early years, we organized local premieres for every single work before publishing them online to contrast what is possible when we are hosting in real life in space versus online. At the simplest level, we found consistently that digital exhibition expanded audiences of the local, right? Most of the time, views online exceeded local attendance, but that's kind of boring, right? What's more interesting is that the locals still brought value in terms of building meaningful connections, expanding interdisciplinary narratives, and offering storytellers notes on their projects from peers who are closer to them, in contrast to sometimes contentious or even violent online commenting cultures, or the notes-giving process in Hollywood, right, where you have people from LA telling you how to tell your story about your community that they've never been to. Drag queens and trans non-binary artists are well aware of this relationship of the local to the global. For decades, they have been community leaders at the local level and now use social media to expand that globally, often battling a lot of hate from fans on social media platforms that is more rare at the local level. Performances in real life by actors and contributors to the piece are messy but organic and makes the experience unique. These spaces are deeply cultural and specific, presenting opportunities for impactful rituals for people to come together, especially when they integrate a diversity of arts and stories. So this is one note, right, that even when you're thinking about documentary, there's so many other forms that go into that, and how can you engage people locally to get their interest in documentary through other art forms and other rituals and kind of community experiences. These experiences create evangelists for our stories and platforms and encourage people to invite others offline, but also online. So we did an analysis of our two most popular shows in the first 5 years, and we found that identity was critical to how stories circulate online. Communities are trying to find each other online, even as platforms may be segregating them away from each other. In an analysis of views from press and other websites embedding trailers of our most popular shows, from Facebook and Twitter to Time Magazine and blackgirlnerds.com, we found the scale of exhibition from identity-specific sites constituted a plurality of views. So on one level, this is marketing advice for y'all. Coordinate the different audiences whose communities are represented in your stories to watch and share at clearly specific times, right? This is Brown Girls, and they really were very clear. They spent months telling people, it is going online at this time, share it at this time. And you'll see the biggest bars are from identity-specific communities. So even though they got on Time Magazine, it wasn't Time Magazine that actually drove people to the stories. It was the small community-specific sites that no one's ever heard of, except people in that community. So what does it mean to take the best practices for holding space in real life and translate them online? So in 2019, I hired Janet Anist, who you'll see in a second, as our head of community. Inspired by work in Chicago's Black feminist abolitionist spaces, Jenna researched and developed what we call brave space agreements. I see that you have community agreements for our offline and online exhibitions. And what I want you to see in this video that I'm about to show, that hopefully has sound, is a video that we showed before each online live stream when we had to shift in-person premieres to the web because of the pandemic. And as you watch it, I want you to imagine if global platforms introduced themselves to new users by playing a video like this, or if you before you logged on to X, if you had to see a video like this, how might this change our online engagement?
I agree.
I agree.
I agree.
I agree.
I agree.
That my gifts offer value to this digital interaction, and I accept the gifts that this digital interaction offers me.
To recognize and embrace cultural differences while interacting socially. On here.
To be playful, if my spirit allows, and joyfully engage.
There's power in transnational communion.
I agree to struggle against
Racism, transphobia, body shame, queer antagonism,
classism,
Misogyny, ableism,
homophobia,
Xenophobia.
shame, and other harmful systems.
digitally, and always. I said digitally, and always.
I agree to be accountable for what I do or say in this space and lead with respect.
RESPECT. Find out what that means to OTV by going to weareo.tv/engagement.
I agree to handle conflict with love.
I agree to handle conflict with love.
I agree to handle conflict with love and recognize that there is always room to disengage.
I love that. I agree to handle conflict with love. It's such a beautiful line. So the question here is, how are you holding space? What are your rituals for both cultivating joy and accountability? If a host has not built trust in the community with a proven track record of providing nourishment, good vibes, and an appropriately curated invite list, no one will show up. And if they do, conflict or harm can ensue. So the cookout is about how we nurture each other, and we can always do it better. Nobody does it perfectly, just as healing is not linear. Everyday people who host conduct organic forms of research on their programming. Simply they ask, right? When people leave, they will let the host know that they had a good time, even if everything was not perfect. If something detracted from their experiences, they let the host know, sometimes directly, sometimes with a look that says, "You better call me later." Experimenting with distribution gives us a lot of information about storytellers' stories and the communities that receive them. The team and I reconfigured towards repair traditional qualitative methods, this is the professor stepping out, including interviews with artists, field notes of my meetings with Hollywood executives to get feedback on the then planned for-profit spinoff, surveys of the Chicago community members who attended our local screenings, participant observations of productions, just going and observing how people were making things, and participatory production where I served as a producer or director on several projects, I think around 10, as a way to get deeper insight into the process. I also, in the book, discuss the quantitative, I would say small data versus big data that we use to hold ourselves accountable, including demographics, social media data, online viewership, in-person attendance at local screenings. The whole project was also, in some ways, a constant research project. In academia, we would say that's autoethnographic. I took regular field notes, particularly during moments of conflict, so that I could self-reflect on where I was the problem, right? Maybe I'm the data point that needs to be fixed, or what issues were in fact not about me, right? It's important to have that self-reflection process to be able to understand where the boundaries between ourselves and others fall. A reparative research process offers more than transparency, and I should say, I thought I had a little caveat at that last slide, but obviously as a full-time researcher, it was my job to do all of that data collection, and I did have actually several dozen student researchers to support that. So I don't expect every leader in this room to be doing all of that work, but like any host, it is important to get regular informal or formal feedback from your community and stakeholders and offer transparency about your challenges and the process itself. So a reparative research process offers more than transparency. It also offers participants and collaborators power over the process. Power is collective, but when it comes to a project blossoming into an organization, it is also bureaucratic, as you all know. Power can look like anything from participants co-designing questions to determining how funding is allocated. In 2019, in this leadership transition, I stepped aside as soon as funding came in from outside sources. Previously, it was funded by my startup account at Northwestern. A lot of people ask me why I did this, and the true tea is that I knew that OTV needed a full-time staff, but I was not willing to quit my job as a professor and sacrifice the decade I spent working towards tenure to run it. After years of me running the project completely unpaid, in fact, I estimate I went into over $15,000 of debt to keep it going because the startup funding I received was not enough. I received interest in funding OTV from the Certina Foundation. Robert Smith, a community member who was here in Chicago at the time and who had attended early OTV events and recommended some early fundraising strategies to me in those years, had recently taken a job at Certina in New York and introduced OTV to his boss, Javier Torres. Javier appreciated the project's ambitions and its fit within the foundation's thriving culture portfolio, so they offered a grant to support our general operations. It was our first general operations grant. And I tell this story to be transparent about how funding materializes for organizations like this, including the ways that my privilege as a professor with an Ivy League PhD may have made it easier for large foundations to trust our work. I remember, this is not my notes, but I remember there was another meeting with a program officer, another large foundation that had heard about me through some way, and we met in my offices in Northwestern's downtown campus where I had this beautiful lake view, and I literally just sat there and schooled this person for 2 hours about how their entire funding strategy was wrong in a nice way. Don't get me wrong, I'm polite. And then later that year we got funding from them, right? And the level of privilege that I had to be able to do that is not a level of privilege that everybody has, and I want to really be transparent about that. When outside funding came in, it gave us the resources to make OTV into an independent 501c3 nonprofit organization. Upon hearing the news, I asked the entire OTV team if anyone was interested in leading the organization as its first executive director, and thankfully Elijah raised their hand because otherwise OTV would not be here today. My seating of power had the effect of bringing the project closer to its core values of intersectionality, removing the only cis male team member. OTV is now led mostly by Black, trans, and women-identified people. And let me tell you, men giving up power is a beautiful thing. And I still view it as one of the best decisions I ever made. As in the cookout, the identity of the host shapes how communities feel about the process, and as much as the specifics about how and where projects unfold. And I could sort of feel some energy shifting around that time, like things needed to change. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. So working to repair systemic harm requires a tremendous amount of patience, empathy, and humility for our collective unwellness. To work intimately with people who are different from you, and we are all differently impacted by systems, requires recognizing boundaries and triggers, even when others may not clearly show that lines have been crossed. As someone living in a body perceived as Black and male with fancy degrees and an exclusive job, I increasingly felt as though the people around me treated me as if I did not or could not care. As someone who grew up mired in violence and studying its patterns, I came into this project feeling I had developed the skills to navigate harm and conflict. OTV tested that belief at every turn. I had to accept my own and others' inevitable shortcomings while embracing strategies for repairing them, even if healing could not be achieved. One big mistake I made in these early years was my lack of transparency about the severe limits I faced experimenting with reparative research in media, tech, and academia, as I write more in the book, but I'll talk a lot about it here. The lean budget of the project before foundation support came in did not align with my commitment to saying yes to nearly everyone who came to OTV looking for support. This meant that my own and my team's capacity was being stretched thin, overcoming our collective efficacy. I feared erecting borders on what was supposed to be a, literally in the name, open network, which could cause even more conflict. As a result, the 2 years following the success of Brown Girls and rising expectations from those around me were the most mentally, emotionally, and professionally difficult years of my adult life to this day. Quote from one collaborator at the time, "That was when I was about to murder you." One collaborator told me in 2018, they were speaking figuratively, of course, I'm still here living, but I understood the intent. I felt the intensity at the time. My closest collaborators deserve more care, but also more money, agency, power, and recognition, most of which I just literally could not promise. As our community expanded, we were being made more aware of conflict and harm that needed our increasingly limited time and attention. And there's a case in the book that goes much into depth about that. I won't talk about it here because it's triggering, but it's a beautiful story. It's also very painful. I noticed so many people were struggling to care for themselves. It took me years to realize the ways I wasn't caring for myself and how this impeded my ability to care for others. I lived by the researcher's code, do no harm, as best as I could, but I was harmful to myself. I binged on high-sugar foods and coffee to manage the stress, which I later learned worsened a handful of conditions in my body affecting digestion, cognition, and muscle tension. I worked weekends and weeknights. In my head, I was always working. There was so much to do and process. I could not stop thinking about OTV and our community. Without any staff for operations or fundraising, I had a lot of responsibility and few people to hold me accountable or support me in building capacity for the project. By 2019, I was drowning. Part of my healing journey has been realizing that though I was often blind to the effects of my actions and made mistakes, I was not my circumstances. I was not always treated with care, but the fact that I experienced conflict was unavoidable because I was not the only person in this situation in need of greater awareness or care. I learned that how we respond to conflict and harm is as important as trying to avoid it altogether. Acting with integrity, embracing transparency, and taking accountability are essential, and in the end, have helped me maintain healthy relationships with nearly everyone I worked with on this project, including the person who wanted to murder me. In retrospect, peaceful communion feels like a fantasy. Our systems offer an inhospitable environment for it. This is especially true for people whose identities are caught in a matrix of intersecting oppressions structured by this capitalist colonial system. We are working hard, and systems are not evenly or competently distributing support. We lack reparative systems that can hold our pain and help us witness it in ourselves and each other. Cultural reparations, which I'm writing another book about, are still a dream worth pursuing. Reparation is a daily practice, or as Adrienne Marie Brown writes, an emergent strategy. If the cookout is a form of ancestral intelligence, how can it and other ancestral intelligences support hosts in cultivating emergent strategies for individual and collective healing? So, I have to be honest that ancestral intelligences beyond the cookout helped me manage this process and, let's be honest, keep my sanity. I relied heavily on astrology, taught by the great queer feminist astrologer, Chani Nicholas, who, if you haven't downloaded her app, please download her app if you are curious about it. It's amazing. It's the only astrology app designed towards healing. Understanding the natal chart as a map of my life where different parts of life are activated at specific moments, right? Yourself, your partners, friends, family, community. Help me ask myself the right questions at the right time and navigate the complex nature of community work. I've since embraced other ancestral intelligences, including the creation of altars, tarot, and divination cards, as other technologies for self-reflection and intention setting. And I eat the proper diet now, mostly, not so much this week, but mostly. And I do yoga and other physical activity to get myself out of my head. Note that this photo was from when I was on an elimination diet to sort out those digestive issues. So I don't look like that anymore, but I still try to keep up some kind of physical activity. I think it's important when you're in this cultural work, which is very heady, to like get into your body. But I am still thinking about the cookout. After spending the last year at Harvard to interview and convene 24 leading technologists, artists, and activists, I've been shifting my thinking from platforms to protocols. Protocols are technologies for connecting people and things, from taking off your shoes when you enter someone's house to technologies that connect disparate social media platforms. I'm thinking about what ancestral protocols do we need to organize collectively for our liberation? I have been invited to support so many organizations, coalitions, and collectives working towards repairing systems in decentralized ways. And while it's been so fulfilling, I'm realizing we lack community-run communication infrastructures to stay in contact within and across our efforts. Any organizing outside of Hollywood, Silicon Valley, or traditional power structures is reliant on corporate social platforms that use algorithms to distribute our stories. These periods where industries are contracting, which is now, I think, are historically ripe for creating new systems and structures. What protocols might support our solidarity? So I want to end on an invitation to co-create an answer to this question. This is an invitation for y'all. I've been working to support Rudy Frazier, creator of Black Sky, which you can vaguely see here, the first moderated feed on the decentralized social media platform Blue Sky, to create a platform based on a decentralized protocol that gives users more ownership and control over their data and its distribution. Organizations, coalitions, and collectives could, in this protocol, which is literally now being built, like Rudy is like actively coding at this moment, could have their own feeds so that you within your organization, with the communities that you serve, can have a space online it's exclusively for you, where you're not trying to fight algorithms and figure out how to reach each other. But you could also have collectively moderated feeds based on issues and communities that cut across organizations, backed by decentralized community governance, and even mutual aid and community re-granting. So there could be a feed for documentary producers of color, or there could be a feed for just media in general for people of color. I'm proposing to Rudy to help organize the organizers, or host the hosts, through feeds called the Cookout and the Kitchen. If you're interested in learning more and potentially becoming an inaugural host on this platform, this is an exclusive invitation to a virtual meeting where this is in December, where I'll be presenting findings from the social media research I conducted at Harvard over the past year, and where Rudy will be introducing this platform. So this QR code is only for values-aligned leaders of organizations, coalitions, and collectives like yours working towards the liberation of Black, Indigenous, and other historically oppressed people. You can share it with other people who aren't in this room, but only with them. And I think this is the only part of the lecture that won't be posted online. So this is truly like a kind of gated situation. I'm trusting you with an invitation to the Cookout. Thank you for trusting me with your time today. Please share my books. I worked really hard on them. The academic book, Reparative Media, is available for pre-order now, but it will also be open access and free to read online in December. And you're free to share and download the comic of the Cookout with whomever you may find it useful. I just want to end by saying that we are all in this together, and I hope there's time for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, AJ, for sharing your heart and your mind and your ancestral line with us.